The text came through while Ola was standing in the break room. "Don't bring your face to the client meeting tomorrow. Sterling's orders." She stared at the screen, not surprised, just tired. Around her, 3 colleagues pretended to be focused on their coffee, but their eyes kept drifting to her cheeks, to the pele, the tribal marks her father had given her before he died. The marks that made her unprofessional, in Sterling's words. The marks that kept her locked in the back office, running numbers for deals she'd never be allowed to present. Ola deleted the message, picked up her bag, walked toward the elevator. That's when she heard it. Footsteps, too measured, too deliberate. The parking deck was supposed to be empty at 9 p.m., but someone was there, leaning against the concrete pillar near her car. Dark suit, bloodstains spreading across his white shirt. A gun held loosely at his side, like it weighed nothing. Their eyes met. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her with the kind of stillness that made her pulse slow instead of quicken. Ola should have run, should have screamed, should have done anything except what she did next. She walked toward him. "You're bleeding." His head tilted slightly. "You're not afraid." "I didn't say that." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "Smart." She pulled the scarf from her neck, stepped closer. "Sit down before you fall down." He obeyed, and that surprised her more than the blood. Up close, she could see the ink climbing his neck, traditional patterns that disappeared under his collar, marks like hers, different culture, same weight. She pressed the fabric against his side. He didn't flinch. "What's your name?" he asked. "Why does it matter?" "It doesn't." He paused. "Yet. This is Velvet Noir. If you believe real power lives in the scars people can't hide, subscribe now, because this story is just beginning." Ola finished wrapping the wound and stepped back. "You need a hospital." "No, not defensive, just final." He looked at her face, really looked, not at the marks, through them. "You have a face that refuses to apologize," he said. "I respect that." Then he walked away. No thank you, no goodbye, just the echo of his footsteps fading into the concrete dark. Ola got into her car, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was draining. She didn't know who he was, didn't want to know, but 2 days later, her firm got the call. Chi Jang-wook wanted to schedule a contract review. Multi-million-dollar logistics deal, the kind that could make or break the quarter. Sterling was ecstatic, sent emails to the whole office about landing the whale, scheduled the meeting for Thursday. Then, Wednesday at 4:47 p.m., Sterling called Ola into his office. "You're not attending tomorrow's meeting," he said, not looking up from his computer. Ola stood in the doorway. "I ran the preliminary audit, and someone else will present it." He finally looked at her. "Mr. Wook is particular about aesthetics. We need to make a good impression. Translation, we need to hide you." Ola felt the old anger rising, the kind that made her father's voice echo in her head. "Your marks are your history. Never bow to people who mistake history for shame." "Understood," she said. Sterling smiled, thought he'd won. He hadn't seen the email that came through at 11:53 that night. Direct, no subject line, sent from an encrypted address. "I only negotiate with the analyst who found the discrepancy. If she's not at the table, neither am I. CJW." Ola read it twice, then a third time, because she knew exactly which discrepancy he meant. The 10% bleed she'd flagged 2 weeks ago in his shipping accounts. The irregularity buried so deep most auditors would have missed it. The theft she'd saved to her private files because something about it felt deliberate. She'd thought no one knew she'd found it. She was wrong. He knew. And now he wanted to meet. Not Sterling, not the firm. Her. Ola closed her laptop and looked at her reflection in the dark screen. The tribal marks stared back. Tomorrow, she'd walk into that boardroom. Not because Sterling allowed it, because the most dangerous man in Atlanta demanded it. The man she'd saved in a parking deck. The man who'd looked at her face and seen a queen, and she still didn't know if that made her an asset, or if it made her his next target. The sound of Ola's heels against marble had always been too loud for comfort. Not the apologetic click-click of women who wanted to disappear, but the steady percussion of someone who refused to shrink. She'd learned that rhythm from her father, back in Lagos, when he'd take her to the markets and walk like he owned every inch of ground beneath his feet. "A Daniel never shuffles," he'd say. "We walk with purpose, or we don't walk at all." The pele on her cheeks had been his final gift. 3 deliberate marks on each side, carved when she was 7, following the tradition of his Yoruba ancestors. He'd held her hand through the pain, whispering stories about queens who wore their lineage on their faces like crowns. 10 years later, he was dead. Cancer that moved faster than any of them expected. And now those marks, the ones he'd called her inheritance, were the reason Sterling kept her hidden in the back offices of Hartwell and Associates, running audits that would never carry her name. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of Atlanta heat that made the air shimmer. Ola dressed carefully, silk blouse the color of midnight, tailored pants that cost a week's salary, her father's gold earrings that caught the light when she moved. If she was walking into that boardroom, she'd do it on her terms. The office was already buzzing when she arrived. Harper stood near Sterling's door, rehearsing the presentation Ola had built. Every slide, every data point, every conclusion she'd drawn from hundreds of hours analyzing Wook Holdings' operations. Harper saw her and had the grace to look embarrassed. Ola, it's fine, Ola said, walking past. Because it wasn't fine, but anger was exhausting, and she needed her energy for what came next. Sterling emerged from his office at 9:45, straightening his tie like a man preparing for battle. He saw Ola and frowned. What are you doing here? Working. The meeting is at 10. I know. She met his eyes. I received an email last night. From Mr. Wook. He requested my presence. Sterling's face went pale, then red. That's impossible. Check your inbox. He copied you. She watched him pull out his phone, watched the color drain from his face as he read. The email had been clear, brutal even. I only negotiate with the analyst who found the discrepancy. Miss Daniel will lead this meeting, or there is no meeting. What discrepancy? Sterling's voice was tight. Ola smiled, said nothing, because 2 weeks ago, working late on a Friday night, she'd found something wrong in the Wook Holdings file, a pattern that didn't make sense. 10% skimmed off every major transaction, rerouted through shell companies, then redistributed back through micro-deposits designed to look like vendor corrections. She'd followed the money through 12 subsidiary accounts, traced it to the Caymans, realized it wasn't Wook's people doing the stealing. It was someone at Hartwell and Associates, and she had a very good idea who. She'd saved everything to an encrypted drive she kept separate from the company's servers. Not because she planned to expose it immediately, but because something in her gut said this information was dangerous. That reporting it to Sterling would be like handing a loaded gun to the person who wanted to shoot her. So she'd waited, watched, kept working, and now the man whose accounts were being bled dry wanted to meet her. The universe had a dark sense of humor. Sterling was still staring at his phone when Gerald, the senior board member, appeared. Is there a problem? No, Ola said before Sterling could speak. No problem. Mr. Wook requested I lead the presentation. I'm ready. Gerald looked between them, reading the tension like a headline. Then let's not keep him waiting. The conference room was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that could seat 20, leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Chi Jang-wook sat at the far end, perfectly still in a charcoal suit. 2 men flanked him. Security, probably. Or lawyers. Maybe both. His eyes found Ola the moment she walked in. She felt the recognition pass between them like an electric current. He knew her. She knew him. And everyone else in the room was suddenly irrelevant. Mr. Wook, Gerald began, extending his hand. Thank you for... Miss Daniel. Wook's voice cut through the pleasantries like a blade. Please, sit at the head of the table. The room went silent. Ola felt every eye turn to her. Felt Sterling's rage radiating from across the room. Felt the weight of 3 years of being invisible suddenly shift. She walked to the head of the table, sat down, and began. 2 weeks earlier, the office had been empty. Friday night, 9 p.m., and Ola was the only one still working. She preferred it that way. No stares, no whispers, just her and the numbers. The Wook Holdings file had landed on her desk that morning with a note from Sterling. Preliminary audit, due Monday. Don't overcomplicate it. Translation, do the work, but don't think too hard. Ola had learned to ignore his condescension. She opened the file and started digging. At first glance, everything looked clean, perfect, even. Shipping logistics for a multinational conglomerate with 0 discrepancies across 18 months of operations, revenue projections that matched actuals within 0.5%, expenses that tracked precisely with industry standards. Too perfect. Real businesses had friction, currency fluctuations, weather delays, human error. But Wook Holdings' books read like a textbook example of flawless operations. That was the first red flag. Ola pulled up the granular transaction data, started cross-referencing dates, amounts, routing numbers. She worked through the night, coffee going cold, eyes burning from screen glare, and then she found it. Buried in the subsidiary accounts, hidden beneath layers of legitimate transfers, was a pattern. 10%, skimmed off the top of every major transaction, rerouted through a shell company in the Caymans, then redistributed back into the main accounts through hundreds of micro-deposits designed to look like vendor corrections. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't an error. This was theft. Sophisticated, methodical theft. And whoever engineered it understood auditing inside and out. They knew exactly where the blind spots were, exactly how to make stolen money look legitimate. Ola pulled the shell company's registration documents, traced the ownership structure, and felt her stomach drop. The company was registered to a trust. The trust was managed by a law firm, and that law firm's founding partner had done Sterling Hughes' estate planning 3 years ago. She sat back in her chair, heart pounding. Sterling wasn't just keeping her in the shadows. He was stealing from clients, and using the firm's auditing blind spots to do it. Ola glanced at the door. The office was still empty. She had a choice. Report this to the board and hope they believed her over their managing partner. Report it to Wook Holdings directly and risk making an enemy of Sterling. Or save it. Keep it close. Wait for the right moment. She created an encrypted folder on her private drive, copied everything, every transaction, every shell company registration, every piece of evidence that proved the money was being stolen. Then she deleted her search history from the company servers and went home. By Monday morning, she'd submitted the audit with a single note in the margin. Preliminary review shows standard operations. Recommend deeper dive into subsidiary transfers before final sign-off. Sterling had scanned it, nodded, filed it away. He didn't know she'd just documented his theft. And Ola didn't know that 2 weeks later, the man being robbed would show up bleeding in a parking deck, looking at her like she was the first honest thing he'd seen in years. Chi Jung-wook didn't believe in coincidence. He sat in the back office of his legitimate holdings company, 3 monitors glowing in the dark, watching the digital fingerprints of everyone who'd touched his accounts in the last 6 months. His people were good, the best money could buy, trained to spot irregularities, flag suspicious patterns, keep his operations clean, but they hadn't caught the bleed. Someone was stealing from him. Slowly, methodically. 10% off the top, rerouted through shells, then laundered back through vendor accounts. It had taken his head of security 3 weeks to even notice the pattern. By then, $8 million had gone missing. Wook could have burned down Hartwell and Associates, could have made the entire firm disappear, but rage was inefficient, and he hadn't built an empire by acting on emotion. Instead, he'd set a trap. He'd instructed his security team to flag the theft internally, but not stop it. Let it continue. See who at Hartwell noticed, who reported it, who had the integrity to catch it and the courage to act. Most auditors saw what they wanted to see, saw clean books and moved on. A few noticed irregularities but calculated that their job security was worth more than their honesty. But one analyst had done something different. Analyst ID OD 7823. She'd gone 3 layers deeper than her clearance allowed, followed the money through subsidiary accounts most people didn't know existed, flagged the discrepancy in her preliminary notes, then saved everything to a private encrypted drive instead of reporting it to her superiors. That made her either very stupid or very smart. Wook pulled up her employee file. Ola Daniel, senior analyst, Nigerian-American, educated at Emory, top of her class, kept in the back office despite a track record that should have made her partner 3 years ago. Then he saw the photo. His breath caught. The woman from the parking deck. The one who'd walked toward him instead of running. The one who'd pressed her scarf against his wound without asking who he was or why he was bleeding. The one whose face carried marks that looked like art instead of damage. She'd saved his life 2 days ago. And she'd been tracking the theft of his money for 2 weeks. Wook leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. She hadn't reported the discrepancy because she suspected her boss. She was waiting, watching, building a case. That kind of intelligence was rare. That kind of patience was rarer. He made 3 calls. The first was to his attorney, instructing him to schedule a contract review with Hartwell and Associates. Routine due diligence. Nothing suspicious. Meeting scheduled for Thursday. The second was to his head of security. Full background on Ola Daniel. Everything. And I want to know who at Hartwell has access to the accounts she flagged. The answer came back within hours. Sterling Hughes, managing partner, expensive tastes, offshore accounts that didn't match his declared income. A pattern of taking credit for junior analysts' work while keeping them professionally buried. Sterling wasn't just arrogant. He was the thief. Wook could have ended him immediately. One phone call to the right people, and Sterling would vanish into the kind of legal nightmare that destroyed careers and families. But that would be wasteful, because Ola Daniel had the evidence. She just didn't know what to do with it yet. And Wook wanted to see what she'd do when she realized the bleeding stranger she'd saved was the man whose money Sterling was stealing. Wanted to see if she had the spine to use the ammunition she'd been gathering. The third call was to himself. A reminder drafted at 11 p.m., scheduled to send at 11:53 p.m., Wednesday night. After Sterling would have told her she couldn't attend the meeting. After she'd gone home angry and alone. The message was simple. I only negotiate with the analyst who found the discrepancy. If she's not at the table, neither am I. He added his initials. CJW, then he waited. The response came 8 minutes later. I'll be there. 3 words. No questions. No panic. Just confirmation. Wook smiled in the darkness of his office. He'd found exactly what he'd been looking for. Someone who couldn't be bought, couldn't be intimidated. Someone who saw corruption and documented it instead of ignoring it. Someone worthy of the empire he was building. Now he just had to see if she'd take the offer. The presentation lasted 40 minutes. Ola walked them through every aspect of Wook Holdings' operations. Revenue streams, logistics efficiency, market positioning. She spoke with the kind of quiet authority that came from actually understanding the numbers, not just reading them off slides. Sterling tried to interject twice. Both times, Wook cut him off with a look. When Ola finished, she set down her tablet and met Wook's eyes. Questions? Just one. He leaned forward slightly. The discrepancy you referenced in your preliminary notes. The 10% bleed in the subsidiary transfers. Did you determine the source? The room went cold. Sterling stood abruptly. Mr. Wook, I assure you there's been no... I wasn't asking you. Wook's voice was pleasant, dangerous. Miss Daniel, the source? Ola felt every eye in the room turn to her. This was the moment. The choice. Protect Sterling and stay invisible, or tell the truth and burn everything down. She thought of her father, of his voice saying, a face without history is a face without soul. She'd spent 3 years hiding, shrinking, letting Sterling take credit for her work while keeping her locked away. Not anymore. The source is internal, she said clearly. Someone at Hartwell & Associates has been skimming 10% off your major transactions and laundering it through shell companies in the Caymans. I flagged it 2 weeks ago and saved the evidence because I suspected reporting it through normal channels would be counterproductive. Sterling's face went white. This is outrageous. Ola, what are you? The shell company is registered to a trust managed by Hartwell and Lee, Ola continued, her voice steady. The same firm that handles your personal estate planning, Mr. Hughes. Gerald stood. Sterling. My office. Now. This is a misunderstanding. Now. Sterling left, flanked by 2 board members. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Wook stood. Gentlemen, I'd like a moment alone with Miss Daniel. The remaining board members exchanged glances but filed out silently, and then it was just the 2 of them. Ola's heart hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. Professional. Wook walked slowly around the table until he stood directly in front of her. You knew, she said. About the theft. About Sterling. You knew before you scheduled this meeting, I suspected. And you wanted to see if I'd report it. I wanted to see if you'd survive it. He tilted his head slightly. Most people would have kept quiet, calculated that their career was worth more than their integrity, and if I had, then I would have signed the contract and never spoken to you again. He paused. But you didn't. No. Why not? Ola met his eyes. Because my father didn't raise me to watch theft happen and do nothing, even when doing something costs everything. Something shifted in Wook's expression. Recognition, maybe. Or respect. The parking deck, he said quietly. You could have left me bleeding. Called the police. Walked away. But you helped. You were hurt. I'm a stranger who was holding a gun. You were a person who needed help. She straightened. I don't abandon people just because they're dangerous. Wook smiled. Actually smiled. Do you know what I thought when I saw you walk toward me instead of running? That I was an idiot? That you were the first honest thing I'd seen in years. The air between them felt charged. Ola could feel her pulse in her throat. Dinner, Wook said. Tonight, I'll send a car. That sounds like an order, not an invitation. It's a request. You can refuse. And if I do, then I'll regret not getting to know the woman who saved my life and exposed my thief in the same week. He stepped back, giving her space. 7 p.m. The car will wait if you need time to decide. Then he walked out, leaving Ola alone in the conference room with her racing heart and the realization that everything had just changed. The car that picked up Ola wasn't the kind you called from an app. Black. Tinted windows. A driver who opened the door without looking at her face. She'd spent the afternoon watching Sterling's world implode. The board had sequestered him in his office with lawyers and accountants. Federal investigators had arrived by 2 p.m. By 4, Sterling's access to company systems had been revoked. Harper had apologized 3 times, each time looking more uncomfortable than the last. Ola had accepted with grace, she didn't feel, and finished her work. Now, driving through Atlanta's industrial district as the sun painted the sky crimson, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, trusting a man she'd met in a parking deck, a man who carried guns and built empires in shadows. The car stopped in front of a building that looked abandoned from the outside. Inside, the space transformed, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her annual salary, and at the center of it all, a table set for 2 with candles that hadn't been lit yet. Wook stood with his back to her, hands in his pockets, watching the sunset. "You came," he said without turning. "You sent a very persuasive car. I sent a car. The persuasion was yours." He turned, and the smile on his face was genuine. "Would you like wine?" "I'd like answers." "Fair." He gestured to the table. "Please, sit." She sat. He poured water, not wine, into crystal glasses. "The 10% skim," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "How long did it take you to find it?" 3 hours. Once I knew what to look for. And you saved it to a private drive instead of reporting it because you suspected Sterling. I suspected someone. Sterling was the obvious candidate. Why didn't you go to the board? Ola considered her answer carefully. Because I'm a black woman with tribal marks working in a firm run by white men who've spent 3 years keeping me invisible. Who do you think they'd believe? Wook nodded slowly. So you waited. I documented. Waited for leverage. And I gave you that leverage today. Did you? She leaned forward. Or did you test me? See if I'd sacrifice my career to expose the truth? Both. He didn't look apologetic. I needed to know if you were the kind of person who could be trusted with important things. Dangerous things. And? You walked toward a bleeding stranger holding a gun. You exposed a managing partner's theft in a room full of his colleagues. You don't scare easily, Miss Daniel. Thunder rumbled outside. The first drops of rain hit the windows like thrown stones. Why me? Ola asked quietly. You could have anyone. Accountants, lawyers, people who don't come with complications. Wook stood, walked to the window. When he spoke, his voice was softer. Come here. She shouldn't have obeyed, should have demanded answers from her seat. But curiosity was a hunger she'd never learned to ignore. She stood beside him at the window, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. You see that building? He pointed to a skyscraper in the distance. I bought it when I was 25. Paid cash. Laundered money from my father's organization through legitimate businesses until I owned half of Buckhead. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of wearing masks. He looked at her directly. I'm tired of people seeing what they want to see instead of what's actually there. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the ink that covered his forearm. Traditional Korean patterns, dragons and waves and symbols she didn't recognize. I got these when I was 17, he said. The day I became my father's soldier. The day I stopped being a son and became a weapon. He traced the designs with his finger. People see these and assume violence. They're not wrong, but they're not right either. These marks are my history. My choices. The person I became and the person I'm trying to move beyond. He let his sleeve fall, looked at her face, not at the marks, through them. You have marks too, he said. Not from violence, from lineage. And the world judges you for them just like they judge me for mine. So what? Ola's voice was sharper than she intended. We're both marked, so we should trust each other? No. Wook stepped closer, not crowding, just present. We're both marked, so we understand what it means to be visible in a world that wants us hidden. To carry our histories where people can see them, and refuse to apologize for it. The rain was heavier now, drumming against the glass like 1,000 fingers. I'm not asking you to trust me because we're alike, Wook continued. I'm asking you to consider a partnership. Real one. You audit my operations. Keep them clean. Keep them honest. Make sure I'm building something legitimate. And in exchange? In exchange, I make sure no one ever hides you again. Ola's breath caught, because she understood what he wasn't saying. This wasn't a job offer. It was an alliance with a man whose empire was built on calculated risks and shadows. I have conditions, she said. Name them. I audit everything. No exceptions. No protected accounts. If I find something wrong, I report it. To you. And if you don't fix it, I walk. Wook's smile was slow and genuine. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I want it in writing. Contract. Legal. No handshake agreements that disappear when it's convenient. Done. And I'm not your employee. I'm your partner. Equal say, equal respect. Yes. The word hung in the air between them. Simple. Final. True. Ola extended her hand. Wook took it, and felt the shift of power settle around them like a promise. The rain continued to fall. The city glowed. And somewhere in the darkness, Sterling Hughes was learning what it cost to steal from dangerous men. But Ola wasn't thinking about Sterling. She was thinking about the man across from her, the one who'd looked at her face and seen a queen. And she was thinking that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who understood what choosing really meant. The black folder arrived on Ola's desk 3 days later. She found it in the morning, plain and unmarked, sitting next to her coffee like it had always been there. No note, no explanation. She opened it. Inside were bank statements, offshore accounts, wire transfer records. 3 years of financial evidence documenting every illegal transaction Sterling Hughes had orchestrated. And at the bottom, a single note in clean handwriting. For when you're ready, CJW. Ola closed the folder, heart pounding. She looked around the office. Sterling hadn't returned since the federal investigators arrived. His office stood empty, door sealed with legal tape. But the board was still deciding what to do. Whether to prosecute, whether to settle quietly, whether to protect the firm's reputation, or pursue justice. Ola had already made her choice. That night, she sat in her apartment with the folder spread across her kitchen table. Rain tapped against the windows. Her father's photograph watched from the shelf. She thought about the queens he'd told her about. The ones who didn't wait for men to fight their battles. The ones who understood that real power wasn't in the sword you carried, but in knowing exactly when to use it. Sterling had kept her in the shadows for 3 years, had taken credit for her work, had made her feel like her face was a liability instead of her history, and now she had proof he was a thief. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Second thoughts? She stared at the message, typed back, "How did you get this? I have people who find things. Why give it to me? You could have destroyed him yourself." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Because I wanted to see if you had the spine to do it." Ola set down the phone, looked at the folder, made her decision. By 3 a.m., she'd compiled everything into a single encrypted file. Bank records cross-referenced with client accounts. Wire transfers matched a date Sterling claimed to be in meetings. A pattern of theft so clear that even a first-year law student could prosecute it. She sent it to the firm's board of directors with a subject line that read, "Evidence requiring immediate action." Then she sent a copy to the Georgia State Bar's Ethics Committee, then a final copy to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. She attached a cover letter with her analysis. Professional, clinical, devastating, and then she went to bed. The response came at 7 a.m. An emergency board meeting. Mandatory attendance. 9 a.m. sharp. Ola dressed carefully. The same silk blouse she'd worn to Wook's dinner. Her father's earrings. Heels that clicked with purpose. When she arrived, the entire board was assembled. Gerald stood at the head of the table, face grave. "Miss Daniel, thank you for coming." She sat. "We've reviewed the evidence you submitted," Gerald continued. "All of it, and we've consulted with legal counsel, federal investigators, and our external auditors." Ola waited. "Sterling Hughes has been terminated effective immediately. Federal charges are pending. The firm will be cooperating fully with all investigations." Relief flooded through her, but she kept her expression neutral. "Additionally," Gerald said, "the board has voted unanimously to offer you the position of managing partner, effective immediately, with full equity and decision-making authority." The room went silent. Ola had dreamed of this moment for 3 years. Partner, equity, power, everything Sterling had denied her. "There's one condition," Gerald added. "Chi Jang-wook has expressed interest in expanding his contract with the firm. He's requested that you personally oversee all of his accounts." "Of course he had. I accept," Ola said. "Both the partnership and the client responsibility." Gerald smiled. "Welcome to leadership, Miss Daniel." The meeting adjourned. Board members congratulated her, shook her hand, suddenly saw her when they'd spent years looking through her. Ola felt the weight of it all settle on her shoulders. The victory, the responsibility, the knowledge that she'd burned down a managing partner's career and risen from the ashes. Her phone buzzed. "Congratulations, partner. Dinner tonight to celebrate. CJW. She smiled, typed back, "I'll send my own car this time." Even better. The restaurant Ola chose was public, upscale but visible. She wasn't meeting Wook in shadows anymore. He arrived exactly on time, dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but his expression was different. Lighter, like he'd shed a weight he'd been carrying. "Congratulations," he said, taking the seat across from her. "4. Managing partner, taking down a thief, becoming the most powerful analyst in Atlanta in less than 2 weeks." He smiled. "Take your pick. I had help. You had ammunition. You're the one who fired the shot." The waiter appeared, took their order, disappeared. Wook leaned back, studying her. "How does it feel?" "Surreal. Terrifying. Right." She paused. "Like I should have done it 3 years ago." "You weren't ready 3 years ago." "How do you know?" "Because 3 years ago, you wouldn't have saved a bleeding stranger in a parking deck. You wouldn't have documented Sterling's theft and waited for leverage. You wouldn't have exposed him in a room full of his allies." Wook's eyes were steady on hers. "You've been sharpening yourself, becoming the kind of person who could handle power when it arrived. And now it's arrived. Now you've taken it." Their food came. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that only happened between people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Finally, Ola set down her fork. "The folder, the evidence, where did you get it?" "I have investigators. They're very good." "How long have you known?" "About Sterling's theft?" 3 weeks. "About the shell companies and offshore accounts?" 2 weeks. He sipped his wine. "I was waiting to see what you'd do with the information. You tested me. I gave you a choice." He met her eyes. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. A test has a right answer. A choice just shows who you are." Ola leaned back, processing. "So this whole thing, the parking deck, the meeting, the folder, it was all engineered?" "No." Wook's voice was firm. "The parking deck was real. I was bleeding. You saved my life. That wasn't a test. That was you being the kind of person who walks toward danger instead of away from it." "And the meeting?" "I wanted to meet the woman who'd found my leak when my own people hadn't, who'd documented it instead of reporting it, who clearly suspected her boss but didn't have the leverage to expose him." He paused. "And then I realized you were the same woman who'd saved my life. That's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were exactly what I'd been looking for." The air between them shifted. "Charged." "Which is?" Ola asked quietly. "Someone I can trust with my empire's secrets. Someone who won't be bought, won't be intimidated. Someone who sees corruption and documents it instead of ignoring it. A partner. An equal." Wook reached across the table, not touching her hand, just placing his palm flat on the table between them. "I'm building something bigger than my father's organization," he said. "Something legitimate. But I can't do it alone. I need someone who understands numbers and people. Someone who can spot the rot before it spreads. And in exchange, you get access to more power than Hartwell and Associates could ever offer. You get to build something real, and you get a partner who will never hide you." Ola looked at his hand, at the ink climbing his wrist, at the offer hanging in the air between them. She thought about her father, about his voice saying, "A Daniel never shuffles. We walk with purpose or we don't walk at all." She'd spent 3 years walking carefully, quietly, making herself small so Sterling wouldn't feel threatened. No more. She placed her hand on the table beside his, not touching, just present. "Equal partners," she said. "Equal say, equal respect." "Yes. And if I find corruption in your operations, I report it. No exceptions. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. And I'm not your employee. I'm not your asset. I'm your partner." "Yes." The word settled between them like a contract. Ola's phone buzzed. A text from Gerald. "Board wants to discuss Wook contract expansion tomorrow. Your thoughts?" She showed Wook the message. He smiled. "What are your thoughts?" "That we're going to renegotiate the terms, expand the scope, and make sure Hartwell and Associates understands that I'm the one they're contracting with, not the firm." "Ambitious. You said you wanted an equal." "I did, and I meant it." They finished dinner, talked about logistics, contract terms, audit schedules, the kind of practical details that built empires. When they stood to leave, Wook extended his hand. Ola took it, and felt the future shift into place. 3 months later, Ola walked out of the Hartwell and Associates building at sunset, briefcase in hand, heels clicking against marble with the same defiant rhythm they'd always had. But everything else had changed. People no longer whispered when she passed. They nodded, asked for her opinion, stepped aside to let her through. The pele on her cheeks hadn't disappeared, but somewhere between the boardroom siege and her first restructuring meeting, the narrative around them had shifted. Now, they weren't scars. They were a signature. Her phone buzzed. A text from Wook. "Parking deck. Usual spot." She smiled. Because usual spot meant the place where everything had started. The concrete pillar where she'd found him bleeding. Where she'd made the choice that changed everything. He was waiting when she arrived, leaning against his car in a tailored shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The wound had healed months ago, no scar visible. "You're late," he said. "I had a meeting." "With who?" "Your CFO." Again. She handed him a folder. "He's still being creative with expense classifications. I flagged everything that needs correction before the quarterly report goes live." Wook opened it, scanned the contents, closed it with a soft laugh. "You really don't pull punches. You told me you wanted honesty. I did, and I meant it." He looked at her, something warm flickering in his dark eyes. "The board made you an offer. Full equity, long-term contract. They did. Are you taking it?" "Part of it. The equity. Yes. The exclusive contract. No." Wook's eyebrow lifted. "No? I'm launching my own firm. Specialized auditing for high-risk clients. Hartwell will be my first client, but not my only one. Ambitious. You said you wanted a partner, not an employee." "I did." His smile widened. "Who's your second client?" "You, obviously. But I'm tripling my rate. Obviously." They stood in the fading light, the city humming around them. 3 months ago, this parking deck had been the site of a chance encounter. A bleeding stranger. A woman who chose to help. Now it was where two equals met to discuss empires. "There's a saying," Wook said quietly, "from my grandmother. The person who sees you when you're covered in blood is the person who deserves to see you when you're wearing gold." Ola felt something shift in her chest, because she understood what he was saying. This wasn't about romance. It wasn't about saving or being saved. It was about recognition. Two people marked by their histories. Two people who refused to hide, finally standing on equal ground. "I have a saying too," she said, "from my father. A face without history is a face without soul. Your father was a wise man." He was. The sun had fully set now, leaving the parking deck bathed in amber streetlights. Somewhere in the distance, Atlanta hummed with its usual chaos. But here, in this concrete space, it was quiet. "People used to tell me no man would choose me because of these marks," Ola said, touching her cheek. "Like I was supposed to wait to be chosen. And now? Now I know I was never unchoosable. I was just waiting for someone who understood what choosing really meant." Wook didn't move, didn't reach for her, just stood there, letting the weight of her words settle between them. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now we build something that lasts." She looked at him directly. "Together. As equals." "As equals," he repeated. There was no kiss, no grand declaration, no traditional ending where one person saved the other, because they'd both already been saved, by themselves, for themselves, and that was the only way their story could have ended. The marks on Ola's face caught the streetlight as she turned to leave. Not scars, not shame, just history, written where the world could see it, and for the first time in her life, she was glad they were there, because they'd brought her to this parking deck. To a wounded stranger who looked at her and saw a queen. To a partnership that would change everything. Some people spend their lives trying to erase their past. Others learn to wear it like armor. Ola had chosen the latter, and found someone who did the same. She climbed into her car, started the engine, and drove into the Atlanta night. Not as Sterling's hidden analyst, not as Hartwell's token diversity hire, as managing partner of her own firm. As an equal partner to a man who built empires. As herself, fully, finally, unapologetically. 3 months ago, she'd wrapped a scarf around a stranger's wound. Tonight, she was wrapping her arms around a future she'd built with her own hands. And somewhere in the darkness, her father was smiling, because a Daniel never shuffles. They walk with purpose, or they don't walk at all. If this story reminded you that real strength isn't about hiding who you are, but about finding people who see you fully and choose to stand beside you anyway, then you've found your place. This is Velvet Noir, where we believe the most powerful love stories are the ones where no one needs saving, they just need someone brave enough to witness them. If you believe that power looks better when it's shared, that history is meant to be worn visibly, and that the best partnerships are built on equal ground, then subscribe. There are more stories waiting in the shadows. Stories about people who refuse to be hidden, who carry their scars like credentials, who understand that being chosen means nothing if you haven't first chosen yourself. And here's a question for you. Have you ever hidden parts of yourself because you thought they made you unchoosable? What would happen if you let them show? What would change if you stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing yourself? Drop your thoughts below, because your story matters too. until we meet again in the shadows.